everyone, and welcome to In the Cloud with 2600 Hertz. I'm your host, Clint Mose, and I'm back with another exciting interview. Today I'm joined by Evan Kirstel. Evan comes from a background of over 30 years' experience in enterprise sales, alliances, and business development in the telecom and IT arenas. These days, Evan has made the shift to being a thought leader and social media influencer in the B2B tech space. With an audience of almost 500,000, it's safe to say that move has been a good one. Evan is also co-host of the popular Talking Heads podcast with Dave Michaels. Welcome, Evan. Thanks for being on the pod today.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Well, we've got loads to talk about, including some advice on what's going to be big on social media this year. So let's just get into it. For our audience, I think it might be great just to start at the beginning. Could you tell us a little bit about your background in telecom enterprise sales and business development?
Yeah, so my background is 30 plus years in enterprise and telecom right out of college, going into the enterprise space with a company called Dialogic. So, at that time, it kind of echoes the beginning of, modern telco networks. So most people probably don't know what 2600 hertz actually means as a frequency in the old long distance networks, but I did. So, at that time it was all about voice, fax, voicemail, and PBXs. And so, yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my journey into enterprise communications.
Awesome. So 30 years, that's a lot of time in the industry. So it certainly makes sense to make the jump into thought leadership. But I would really like to hear a little bit more about what led you to the sort of social media and the influencer path.
Really, with the rise of LinkedIn and Twitter, probably about 15 years ago, I actually found them both to be a great sort of research and sales tool. So, it wasn't really being used that way. They were being used, LinkedIn was a Rolodex for basically hunting and job
Yeah.
search, and Twitter was like a social network for lightweight, casual conversations. But I found, communities out there early on both platforms, and it was the new way of kind of networking and connecting across these emerging digital networks for selling. And from there, just started, to build an audience. Really, I would say snowballed from there.
I really like that idea of thinking of spaces like LinkedIn and Twitter as, like you said, a research and a sales tool.
Yeah, and they've turned into media companies more than even social networks. And so, the platforms like those and others, you really can't get your message out. The old days of picking up the phone and calling a prospect, that still happens, but it's a brand new world in terms of content creators, content marketing, and analytics and AI in marketing, and those really happen through digital channels now. But it's still fun to connect and meet new people, and those are great platforms to do that, even beyond just for selling and marketing purposes.
All that's super fascinating, and we are definitely going to circle back here to some social media stuff in a bit, but I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into your perspective on the Cloudcoms market. With the new year well underway, what do you see as some unique challenges in the space that service providers and resellers are going to be facing this year?
Well, yeah, I think we've all come to accept that the cloud is the de facto delivery mechanism for all the services we deliver. It's no longer an if, it's just when and how. And it's no longer Amazon's AWS's game. We see multiple cloud platforms. We see a hyper competitive market, no pun intended, with the hyperscalers. And we just see so many platforms for delivery of new services and innovation. It's probably, the most exciting time in telecom in certainly my 30 years. There's just so much opportunity for innovation, differentiation, new services, and more. So really, really great time to be in the industry.
I love that perspective, right? It's a moment where AWS is no longer, the only group who can offer cloud hosting services. And I love thinking about it in terms of there's all of this opportunity for differentiation for coming up with new services. But I also think, right, we have to kind of temper some of that enthusiasm with, what the market looks like right now. So what would you say, maybe about those same topics, but in light of all of the mergers and acquisitions that have happened over the past few years, where the big companies are getting bigger and their solutions are moving toward looking a lot similar than they used to maybe 5 years ago or so.
Yeah, I think every company is sort of looking at the marketplace and copying the features of each other. Even we talked about social networks now, copy each other, whether it's live streaming or hashtags, or every social platform is copying each other, and most of the cloud players, if not copying, trying to figure out what the consumers want and deliver on that. And it's really working its way into every aspect of the communications market, which globally is a multi-trillion-dollar market. So I mean, who would have thought that the contact center is really rapidly moving to the cloud with CCaaS? I mean, that's one of the
Yeah.
last bastions of legacy kind of technology. We're seeing developers innovate with CPaaS platforms in ways that are pretty new. I mean, if you did this kind of thing years ago, you were kind of like a hacker, hacking
Yeah.
together, hardware and software boards and to try to deliver new apps. Now there are APIs and toolkits off the shelf, like from folks like yourself and others. And residential communications. I think POTS is gradually, actually disappearing. It's no longer an if; it's just when.
Yeah, in terms of pots, I believe it's this August is the FCC's kind of mandated sunsetting. So it's really interesting to see what is going to come out between now and then, because while I think in the cloud comms industry, we obviously spend a great deal of time talking about business communications, right? Like residential communications is also interesting and might be a smaller bit of the market, but something that is coming into the cloud, right?
Yeah, I mean, residential communications can mean business communications too for small businesses and the whole remote work phenomenon. There's a lot of overlap now with remote workers demanding, a whole suite of communication services that they got maybe in the office, and trying to integrate their business, their workflows into the enterprise while they're working from home. Whether it's a contact center agent or a field service person, integrating mobile telephony and messaging into their workflow. Enterprises are really having to adapt, and service providers too, and how they deliver and deploy and design new communications apps.
Yeah, that's certainly a great point about, work from home kind of blurring that distinction of what's business communication and what's residential communication. So, thinking about this kind of exciting moment, this moment of major disruption, how do you think a smaller regional reseller should respond? How should they move into the market? And maybe a better way to ask this is, what advice would you have for somebody looking to expand their footprint or their customer base in 2022?
Yeah, well, I think it's time to shift away from just being a reseller or an agent kind of model, and delivering plain vanilla to your customers, to really being a trusted advisor and a consultant, and going after verticals and niches and applications that are kind of new and exciting, and that are sticky and add value. So never has the idea of a value add been more important. And if you're just reselling what you did yesterday or last year or last month, you're really going to have trouble being successful in this market. So channels have still have a massive opportunity, but they have to differentiate themselves with something that's novel and unique to a business. So if your customer is a local doctor's office, or pizza joint, or grocery store, they're going to have needs that are different in this new normal we find ourselves in, with the pandemic and workforce management, with mobile 5G services, with getting analytics and data. I mean, it's a brave new world. So time to up your game and really dig in, educate yourself, and partner with companies who can deliver, more than the old plain vanilla kind of telephony.
Sure. And I really like that idea of, maybe redefining what your value add is, right? Like your value add in 2016 might not make sense anymore in 2022. And so how do you sort of reposition yourself as a trusted advisor? And do you need to start or build out a, development team in order to start giving some of these really customizable, really niche offerings to your customers? I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I mean, there's every business is not like the next, and I know someone who's supporting a bunch of Domino's franchisees owners with communication services, and their needs, as a franchise owner, are very different. They want to see how many not just calls they have coming into the Domino's locally. They want to see missed calls. They want to have dropped calls. They want to be able to take text orders. I mean, there are all kinds of unique features and functionality that are, part of a business that are unique to the pizza business, which are very different from if you're selling to, the legal profession. So going deep into verticals and really understanding business communications in those verticals is critical now in telecoms.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, especially when we think about, right, my family and I are still ordering carry out handful of times a week. Got to support those local businesses. So, just in that very specific market, totally turned on its head with the way orders are received, the way they're trying to interact with their community, where, your local, maybe not Domino's, but your corner store maybe can't just get by on walk-in business anymore, but now needs to be able to communicate via SMS with their customers. They might need a more streamlined flow of, what happens with a website order. How does it get plugged into their system? How do they go from their point of sale system to the back kitchen? So all of that, I think, is really, really great advice. And I think our partner community will definitely appreciate that. And the reminder to always, pay attention to your vertical, pay attention to the needs of your customers, because as these bigger players continue to consolidate, what's going to set you apart is those sort of super customizable offerings. So, last topic here before we sign off, I'd love to hear your thoughts on social media heading into 2022. What do you think is going to be big this year, and what should our partners plan on doing in 2022 to continue growing their brand and, more importantly, their customer base?
Well, no lack of irony, voice. Voice is exciting. Voice is back. You've got social networks like Clubhouse that are really popular for voice chat, drop-in audio communication communities. Twitter equally have Twitter Spaces, so you can join people together and have live audio chat. And some people like myself love audio, love podcasting, love audio consumption, and really prefer listening and engaging on these audio first platforms. So that's going to continue to be a big trend. And I think the big trend will be, video, where, whether it's content creation, live streaming, marketing through video. Increasingly, it's just a better way to engage and drive awareness and eyeballs than traditional text-based content and blogging, et cetera. So more audio, more video, more interactivity, and new platforms like Clubhouse, like Reddit, even for B2B, like Quora, and onwards and upwards. So yeah, lots of cool stuff happening on the social front.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I feel like whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn, whenever I'm scrolling through, it's almost like there has to be audio, there has to be video, there has to be something to catch my attention, because, no matter how many emojis you throw in there, just like a big solid block of text just it's not cutting it anymore these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of fun. It's going to be an interesting year for social, and look forward to catching more of your content there.
Great. Well, that's about all we've got time for today. But again, really great chatting with you, Evan. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you'd like to keep up with Evan's thought leadership work, be sure to give him a follow on LinkedIn and Twitter, and check out the Talking Heads podcast. I'll be sure to drop a link in the show notes for all of those. For our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe wherever you're listening. And while you're already there, write us a review. It only takes a second and is a huge help to all of us here at Team 2600 Hertz. Until next time, thanks everyone.